Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving into a really insightful integrative review by Werle and Giones. It tackles a central and honestly pretty contentious debate in entrepreneurship research. What is the right way for entrepreneurs to experiment?
For years, a debate has been simmering in the field. Should entrepreneurs just act quickly, like the whole lean startup approach preaches? Or should they think things through carefully and deliberately, almost like a scientist in a lab? This has created a real tension in the literature.
So on one side, you've got experimentation as action, that fast, iterative, go out and do model. And on the other, there's experimentation as reflection, a much more careful, theory-driven process that's really rooted in the scientific method. This has set up a kind of dichotomy between two really popular approaches, and as the research is starting to show, they can lead to vastly different outcomes.
And we're not just talking about a small academic squabble here. The stakes are incredibly high. The paper points to studies like those from Camufo and colleagues back in 2020 and more recent work by Gambardella and Messinet. They're finding significant real-world differences in things like revenue and even survival rates depending on the approach a venture takes. So the big question this paper asks is, what's really going on here?
Okay, let's dive in. We're going to explore this paradox, then I'll walk you through the paper's really novel framework, and finally, we'll look at the exciting new research agenda that it opens up for all of us in the field.
So, first up, the experimentation paradox. To really get to the bottom of this, we have to unpack these two competing views. As the authors argue, the real issue is in how we've been thinking about or conceptualizing experimentation itself. If you take a quick look at the history here, which the paper reviews beautifully, you can see how these two distinct camps kind of solidified over time. It started with trial and error in the 90s, then the huge wave of lean startup, and now, more recently, this call for a much more scientific method. So let's start by digging into that first perspective. Okay, so first, let's unpack this action-oriented school of thought. This is the one most of us probably associate with the lean startup movement and all of its intellectual predecessors. The paper defines this as a real-time, path-dependent process. What does that really mean? It's all about doing much more than thinking. It's about breaking down these huge, messy problems into small, testable questions through immediate action and interaction with the world out there.
The whole goal here is to find a solution, maybe even the optimal one, for a given problem as quickly as you can. You do this by acting on a bunch of options and learning from what happens. As Packard and his colleagues put it back in 2017, the whole point is to turn that paralyzing absolute uncertainty into something more manageable, environmental uncertainty, by just doing stuff.
Now, this diagram from the paper is fantastic. It visually captures these two sides of the coin perfectly. We've just been talking about that loop on the right, acting through experiments to find a fit with the environment. So now, let's explore that other loop, the thinking loop, over on the left.
All right, so in pretty stark contrast to that action-first approach, we have this other, very influential stream of research that really champions a more reflective, almost scientific mindset for entrepreneurs. This whole approach is framed as a quasi-scientific activity. The idea here is that the entrepreneur isn't just a doer. They're also a theorist or a scientist. They're carefully constructing experiments to try and validate their beliefs before they go all in and commit serious resources.
So the crucial point to get here is that this approach, which has been heavily influenced by scholars like Phelan and Zenger, is all about trying to identify the most promising path forward by validating your theories of value. It's about turning absolute uncertainty into what you could call creative uncertainty, choosing the right path before you start running down it.
So what we have are two seemingly contradictory views, and both have some strong theoretical and empirical backing. This right here is where things get really interesting. The paper's core contribution is that it resolves this tension by asking us to shift our perspective entirely.
So how do we get past this? Well, the authors argue that focusing on whether action is better than reflection, or if lean startup is somehow superior to the scientific method, that's just fundamentally asking the wrong question. The key, they propose, is to shift our focus away from the method of the experiment and onto its function. We need to be asking, what is this experiment actually designed to do? What is its purpose in the whole new venture creation process?
And this reframing immediately gives us two very distinct functions. First, there's discovery, which lines up really nicely with that reflection approach. Its job is predictive, to validate and select the best opportunity from a basically closed set of outcomes. And second, there's making, which, you guessed it, aligns with the action approach. Its purpose is generative, to actually shape the environment and create new possibilities from a wide-open set of outcomes.
And this model just illustrates their point brilliantly. It shows that thinking or discovery and acting or making, they aren't competing methods at all. They're actually complementary functions inside a larger learning loop. And it's this loop that drives entrepreneurial action through every single phase of venture creation, from the very beginning all the way to performing at scale.
Now, this functional perspective doesn't just neatly solve an old debate. What it really does is open up a whole new, much more integrated, and I think productive agenda for us as entrepreneurship scholars.
And this is where it gets really exciting for us as researchers. The framework translates directly into these really concrete, fascinating questions. For instance, in that initiating phase, how does a founder's identity actually influence their choice between a discovery or a making function? Or think about the performing phase. How do ventures manage to sustain those generative making experiments when all the pressure is to just exploit and execute? This gives us really clear pathways for future studies.
So the crucial point to take away from all this is that this functional rewiring helps us move beyond what the Germans would call a Methodenstreit, a battle of methods. It gives us a shared language, discovery versus making, that can finally integrate these fragmented fields like lean startup and effectuation. And it points us toward brand new avenues, like actually studying the design of these experimental artifacts themselves. And this leaves us with a final thought for our own research moving forward. If both discovery and making are critical functions, then maybe those performance differences that Kamafuo and others found aren't about one method being superior. Maybe it's all about the fit between an experiment's function and its context. It really suggests that our measures of success might need to evolve to capture not just the discovery of value, but the co-creation of it as well.